Alright, so let's get started. Hello, intellectual wanderers, and my dear fellow friends. Welcome to our YouTube channel, that is UPSC Geek by NRG. We are unraveling the journey of one of the most fascinating political thinker of European time, that is John Locke. And today, in this lecture number 24, we will be dealing with the last part of Locke section. And in the previous lectures, we have already dealt with Locke's theory of social contract, where we have seen that the Locke social contract basically established a form of government with three basic rights, that is, right to legislate, right to execute, and right to adjudicate, right? And in this part 4 of this lecture, we will be mainly dealing with one of the very fundamental concept of Locke, that is concept of property, right? As you can see that on the slide, right? Why property? Because according to the Locke, the sole purpose for the formation of commonwealth is the protection of property, right? Why is Locke giving lot of emphasis upon property? Because Locke is a scholar of possessive individualism or capitalist class, right? Capitalist class. Locke is a philosopher of capitalist class. He was again a child of his time, that was a child of industrial revolution, right? And hence, coming from that particular time, he will always be advocating the idea of possessive individualism, because during that time there was a spurt of what? Trade and commerce. People were very much particular about their properties. People were very much particular about the trade and industries, right? So Locke is a scholar of possessive individualism, and so he was the advocate of capitalist class. It means man has absolute right over his property, and that's why the sole purpose for formation of the commonwealth of the Locke, right, is the protection of the property, right? And here we will be seeing how Locke is associating his idea of property with the absolute right of life and liberty. He says that if there is no property, if there is no property, there will be no life and liberty. Why? Because property or wealth makes the life of individual meaningful. It brings what? Pleasure to the individual lives, and hence it makes the property makes individual lives worth experiencing and worth living. That's why he is giving a lot of emphasis upon what? Property. So this is why he will talk very much fundamentally about the concept of property, because as he belonged to the school of possessive individualism, he will, for him, the property as property, like Hobbes, will be very important, very significant, right? So let's see in further detail, right? All right. So as we have seen that the sole purpose of the formation of the commonwealth is to protect the property of individual, right? So why man should have absolute right over his property, right? Why man should have absolute right over his property? Property is the product of one's labor. Locke, belonging to the capitalist class, Locke belonging to the school of possessive individualism, he will always propound the idea of what? He will always propound the idea of the labor theory. Okay, what is the labor theory of property? That property is the product of one's labor. Labor is a part of man's personality. Why? Because men are always bound to labor. Men are always bound to industry, right? To produce something, to create something, and man should have absolute right over the product of his labor. Here Locke is propounding the idea that as the labor is the part of man's personality, man should have absolute right over the product of his labor, right? This is why the property becomes very important. If state takes away the property of a person, it violates the dignity of that person, right? If state takes away the property of that person, it basically violates the dignity of that person. It commits the act of aggression, right? Why? Because as labor is the personality of the individual, and individual is sovereign in themselves. If state tries to encroach or seize the property, or kind of try dominating over the labor, then it is similar to that of violating the dignity of that person, right? It commits the act of aggression. Man should have absolute right or entitlement over the property. This is the reason he is giving why man should have absolute right or entitlement over the property. Why? Because labor is a part of innate personality of the individual, right? And innate personality of the individual, and the property is product of that particular labor, and hence it becomes very paramount for us to it becomes very paramount for the state to protect that particular right of the individual. Okay, according to Locke, person has absolute right over his labor, right? This is why property becomes very important. Property becomes very important, right? The labor of his slave and labor of his horse, right? Thus he justifies absolute right to property. This is why he is justifying the absolute right of property, that property is product of one's slave. Property is the product of one's labor. Property is product of one's horse, which are very much pertinent to the life and liberty of individual, right? Out of all rights, property is the most important right, right? Hence at times Locke uses the term right to property to include life and liberty as well. For Locke, property is equivalent to life and liberty, right? Why? Because during that time there was a situation, if one does not possess a property, his life was not worth living, because it was not so pleasurable, because there was no property to enjoy, there was no wealth to enjoy, and hence life was miserable, right? So sometimes Locke uses the term property in order to explicit the terms like life and liberty as well, right? And this is very much relevant even to these days, right? People who possess property kind of lead a little bit more happier life, right? This is the world today. The people are becoming more utilitarian in nature, right? Where we derive pleasure from the materialistic wealth, right? And hence this is what Locke is also propounding about, that this is why the right to property becomes absolute right, because without property the life is not worth enjoying. Life and liberty as well is not worth enjoying. That is why sometimes he uses the term property to include the life and liberty, right? This is the basic idea behind his concept of property, right? So let's see how origin of property is being put forward by Locke. Okay, initially property was held in common, as we saw in the case of Plato as well, that there was a communism which was prevailing in the state of nature, right? That was similarly which was also followed by Hobbes, Locke, and etc., right? In state of nature there was a concept of communism where property was held in common ownership. It is common sense that property can never remain in common ownership, right? We cannot hold any property in common ownership. There will always be a case or issue of conflict of interest, right? Because the common ownership or the everyone's property is no one's property, right? Everyone's property is no one's property, because there will be a conflict of interest among the ownership. Okay, so those who were industrious, enterprising became the owners, right? So when there was a common ownership in the state of nature, among the owners, those who were industrious, enterprising, they became the owners. They started dominating over those who were lazy, quarrelsome, and daydreamers, right? And hence they remained poor throughout. This is very basic and logical practice, right? In the society, the people who are more industrious, more enterprising in nature, they basically start dominating over the property. They basically start dominating over the other aspect of materialistic wealth, and those who were lazy, quarrelsome, and daydreamers, they remained poor. According to Locke, God has created apple, milk, meat, to eat and drink and not to sacrifice, right? This shows the utilitarian nature of Locke, right? Basically he is propounding the idea that the materialistic wealth is made to enjoy, right? He is giving that natural source, that is God has created apple, meat, milk and etc. to drink and not to sacrifice, right? What is symbolic here, right? He is saying that whatever materialistic wealth is, it is for the enjoyment, right? Like property, it is not to sacrifice. We cannot let go the ownership of property just for the sake of communism. We cannot embrace the idea that property is for community, property is for the general welfare, because God has created property and all the materialistic things like apple, milk, meat and etc. to eat and drink and not to sacrifice. Thus Locke is utilitarian. Those who are industrious will be able to lead a good life, right? What does this mean here, right? Those who are industrious. So see, since everything is made for enjoyment of the people, those who are more industrious in nature, they will start acquiring all the materialistic wealth, right? And the people who are a little bit lazier than the rest, the people who are more daydreamers, they will be left behind, and those who are industrious, they will be started acquiring almost all of the wealth, and hence there will be a parity, there will be wealth parity, where few stronger will be having more of the wealth than the majority of the poor, right? Then what will happen in this case? Again, there will be a sort of what? Conflict of interest. There will be a conflict in the society, right? So this is what is something which Locke is being concerned about, and this is why Locke convened a general meeting so as to put forward the idea of social contract that we have already seen in the previous lecture. If you guys haven't watched the previous lecture, I would love to have you all go and watch that previous lecture so that the conceptual clarity is built on very solid pedestal. If you will not understand the line of concept previously, you will not be able to sustain the flow of understanding in further lecture as well. So this is what is the basic idea about Locke's social contract, right? And here hence the concept of Locke's properties becomes very important, right? So the last thought that we have understood here is that those who were industrious will be able to acquire almost all of the property, because men are utilitarian in nature, and since to lead a good life, people will start acquiring what? Lot of wealth. So there will be a what? There will be a wealth parity, right? That will be prevailing in the society, where few industrious, few powerful will be start acquiring majority of the wealth, and those people who are a little bit lazier, quarrelsome and daydreamers, they will remain poor, right? So that was all about his concept or his perspective about the property, right? So let's imagine this particular situation in this way. I am, let's say, a particular insan, let's say A is John Locke, right? And he is, by putting forward his perspective on, let's say, property, he is trying to convince the representative of different families, right, who John Locke has convened for the social contract, and he is telling all these particular stories that it is a society of utility where few industrious people will start acquiring more wealth, and the people who are a little bit lazier, quarrelsome and etc., they will be left behind, and hence to have the equivalent or harmonious society, we need to have a social contract, right? So this is a thought or perspective which Locke is propounding to the to the representative who are attending the meeting of John Locke, right? So this is the particular idea which is being put forward by Locke, okay? But Locke has also given 3 limitations on the right to property. What are the 3 limitations? The first limitation is labor limitation. What is labor limitation? It means only that property is justified, which is the product of labor, right? So when Locke is talking about his concept of property, he is talking only about the property which is acquired through one's labor, right? He is not propounding or talking about the property which is illegally encroached, right? he is not talking about the property which is encroached. He is only talking about the property which is acquired through one's labor, right? He is giving this particular demarcation or limitation just to ensure that people do not follow or misunderstand his concept of property, right? He is very much particular when he talks about his concept of a right to property, that the property which is acquired through one's labor, which is product of one's labor, he is only talking about that particular property, right? So first limitation he is giving is that about labor limitation. It means that the property is justified which is product of one's labor. What is second limitation? Right to property belongs to all. No one can deprive the other from his right to property, right? Against feudal lords. He is very much particular about whom? The feudal lords. Why? Because they are basically operating on the basis of heredity, right? Heredity. Why heredity? If father is owning, let's say, 100 acre of land, it will be passed over to his heirs or his sons, right? So he is very much particular about that right to property belongs to all. So let's say I am John Locke. I am propounding the idea of my perspective on the property to you all who are the representative, who are coming to attend my social contract meeting, right? So the first limitation I am saying that whatever I am talking about property is very much confined and limited to the labor theory, that is the property which is being the product of the labor, right? The second limitation which I am expliciting is that right to property belongs to all, right? I am strongly rebuking against the feudal lords, right, who try to or who strive to accumulate property on the basis of heredity, right? And I am clearly saying that here the right to property which I am talking about is belongs to all, right? Is belong to all. It is not very much confined, or it does not limited only to a particular class, that is feudal class, right? And hence everyone have the right to strive for the property, right? So this is the second limitation, that right to property belong to all. What is the third limitation? No right to spoil property. Why? Because property is the product of one's labor, and hence no one have the authority to spoil or hamper or destroy one's property. Why? Because it will be like encroaching or attacking human dignity, right? Human dignity. Why human dignity? Because labor is part of man's personality, right? And if someone tries attacking the property or spoiling the property, it will be equivalent to attacking the dignity and personality of the individual. And hence Locke is trying to clearly explicit the idea that there is no right to spoil property. Why people will kind of resort to spoiling the property, right? So let's say there is a competition to acquire a particular piece of land. Land is a limited resource, right? In this particular competition, there might be a opportune or situation which will arise that will lead to damage or destruction of this particular property. Just to eliminate the competition among man, people may bound to destroy this particular piece of resources just to eliminate the competition, just to eliminate the what? Just to eliminate the war-like situation or warring situation among men. And hence he is clearly resorting to the idea that individuals have no right to spoil the property because it belongs to the labor of the individual, right? So these are the three limitations which are being put forward by whom? The great John Locke himself. Thus the limitations are actually no limitations. They all favor the capitalist class. For capitalist class, for property is sacred, it is source of virtuous life. This is our analysis. After reading his three limitations, this is what the thinkers are analyzing about Locke's idea of property. That is, the whatever Locke is giving as a limitation, they are not basically our limitation. They are basically our advocacy to the capitalist class. They are basically favors for the sake of promotion of the accumulation of the property for capitalist class. These are not limitations, right? For capitalist class, property is sacred. That we already hearing since the start of this lecture, that for capitalist class, property is what? Sacred. Property is what? Is paramount, right? And hence whatever limitation Locke is giving, this is basically is kind of favoring the capitalist class. It is source of virtuous life, right? We have just seen how he is equating property with life and liberty, right? He is saying that if there is no property, there will be no good life, there will be no liberty, and hence there will be no virtuous life, and hence it becomes very sacred. It becomes what? It becomes very paramount for capitalist class, right? So let's see one of the statement here. Okay, so this is one of the statement which says sole purpose for which state is created is the protection of property. Just now we have seen a statement, right, that the sole purpose for the creation of commonwealth is for the protection of property, and sometimes it is explicitly asked in the exam. They will give you this particular statement and they will ask you to comment, right? Comment, and they will give you sole purpose for the creation of a commonwealth is the protection of property. Locke, 10 marks or 15 marks. So how you can approach this particular answer, right? Locke is known as scholar of possessive individualism, right? He is known as scholar of possessive individualism because of the justification of absolute right to property. Why he is known as the scholar of possessive individualism? Because for his justification of the absolute right to property, that is what we have just seen, that he is considering right to property so sacred, right? And hence he is called as scholar of possessive individualism because he is kind of favoring the idea of property for capitalist class, especially, right? He himself belonged to a capitalist class, and hence he is kind of justifying the absolute right for property for the capitalist class. He established the idea that property has a sacred institution, right? It is a sacred institution, property. Why? Because nobody can hamper, attack or destroy it, right? It belongs to the labor of individual, it belongs to the dignity of individual, and hence it is what? It is sacred institution. God has created property so that man can lead a good life, right? He himself said that God has created what? Apple, meat, milk and etc. to drink and eat and not to sacrifice. Likewise, he is saying that God has created property so that man can lead a good and virtuous life. God has not created property so that man can destroy it. Man has natural right to property, right? And in the limitations as well, he said that no one can destroy the property because it is equivalent to the destroying the dignity of the individual, right? And for Locke, the dignity of individual is very paramount, very significant, very important, right? And hence man has natural right to property. Right to property is most important of all rights as it includes right to life and liberty. Man has not transferred his right to property, right? So what is the basic idea? The basic equation here is right to property is equal to right to life and liberty, right? Because here, according to Locke, being a scholar of possessive individualism, property will be the sole object to lead a good life, to enjoy the man's liberty. And here, right to property is most important of all, right? As it includes right to life and liberty. Man has not transferred the right to property, right to life and right to liberty to the government, which they are aspiring to form by the social contract, right? This is how important property is for the scholar of possessive individualist, that is John Locke, right? So this is the idea. So state cannot make any such law which deprives a person from his absolute right to property. If state deprives a person, man has a right to revolt. In his theory of revolution, we have already seen one of the most important factor. Locke propounds that if state tries to encroach or seize or deprive individual from his right to property in arbitrary manner, then man will have a right to revolt against the state, which is sovereign, which is supreme, right? This is how important property is for whom? For Locke, right? And hence he says that if state deprives a person from a right to property, man has a right to revolt. Man has, and what is revolt according to Locke? It is basically the transfer of power from one set of people to other set of people. What does this mean? It is basically a government which is trying to encroach over one's property, which is trying to deprive the people from their right to property. They can basically change the government. They can transfer the power from particular government to the new government, right? So this is the basic idea about the Locke's right to property, right? State has created not to limit the property but to protect the property, and hence the idea comes here, the sole purpose for the creation of the commonwealth is for the protection of the property, right? And man has absolute right over the property because property is the product of labor of man, again, right? So it is entitlement of man. It is entitlement of man, right? What is entitlement of man? It is indefeasible, it is indefeasible, it is inalienable, it is infallible. No one can take the right to property from the man, and hence it becomes the entitlement of man. One should have absolute right over one's personality and thus one's property, right? So this is how important right to property is according to Locke, right? Thus Locke justifies absolute right to property, though he puts limitation like labor limitation, spoilage limitation, yet he suggests that the role of state is just like that of night watchman. What is night watchman role? Just to safeguard and protect the property, right? There is no other role other than to safeguard and protect the property, and hence the profound statement that comes is that the sole purpose of creation of commonwealth is to protect the property, which is the product of one's personality, product of one's labor. And this is how important right to property is for Locke, right? So this was the idea about Locke's property. Let's see some of the overall criticism of Locke's theory of social contract, right? As we have seen how diligently he puts forward his theory of social contract, there are several criticism which has been given by few very insightful political thinkers, right? And let's see some of the contradictions that we find in his theory of social contract while we analyze his theory of social contract. So the first contradiction lies in his idea of natural rights. Okay, what was his idea of natural right? Basically the right to life, liberty, property and health. Okay, so the first contradiction is that his idea of natural right, which is inherent in men, and theory of tabula rasa, right? So what is his theory of tabula rasa, and what is the contradiction between his idea of natural rights and his concept of tabula rasa? Let's see it. Okay, he begins his theory of tabula rasa, that is empty mind. Okay, what is his theory of tabula rasa? It becomes very much important in ethics as well, right? That men are they are born with tabula rasa. The brain is like clean slate, and hence through experience we gain our intellect, we gain our knowledge about the world, right? So he begins with his theory of tabula rasa, that is empty mind or blank knowledge during a birth, but again says that man has innate right to liberty, life and property, right? So the basic criticism which is being made here is that, in simpler term, on one hand Locke is giving the idea of natural right, where he is saying that the natural right, that is life, liberty and property, is inherent innately. What is innately? What is this term innately mean? Which means that a particular right, a particular characteristic is present since birth, right? So this is what it means when he says that the natural rights are innately present, or innate rights to liberty, life and property. But on the other side he says the concept of tabula rasa, where he says that the people, they are born with a brain like a clean slate, right? Like a clean slate, right? Where there is nothing inside, and through experience people gain their knowledge of the world, right? So these are the these are the concepts which are too extreme, right? On one hand, he is saying, he is propounding natural rights to be innate, which is being present since birth, and on the other side he is propounding the idea of tabula rasa, where he is advocating the idea that the men are born with a clean slate like birth, and through experience, through empiricism, they gain their worldly knowledge, right? So this stands in a great contradiction itself, right? So this is what the thinkers are also criticizing the Locke's idea, that there is a contradiction in his idea of natural rights and in his theory of tabula rasa. Without social relationship, his natural right cannot be defined in terms, right? So this is the first criticism uh, of the Locke's theory of what? Locke's theory of social contract. What is the second criticism? Locke does not give any logical or scientific ground. This is what we have already seen. According to like Hobbes, he has given a his methodology of resolutive compositive methodology just to give a scientific credibility to his theory of social contract. Locke does not give any logical or scientific ground. His approach of social contract was very commonsensical in nature. Why? Because his methodology was very much empirical based, right? Based on the sheer observation of whatever was happening during his time, right? So this is what critics are criticizing his social contract, that Locke does not give any logical or scientific ground as to why human beings are social or good or capable of ruling themselves, right? In Hobbes, as we have already seen, that he gives very pessimistic idea about human nature, that men are basically nasty, poor, brutish, a pleasure seeker, they chase power after power, and which seizes only upon one's death. And he gives a scientific validity by advocating the methodology of resolutive compositive method to support his what perspective on human nature. But here Locke says that men are basically good, they are basically social, they are capable of ruling themselves, but he does not support his idea or perspective on human nature on any logical or scientific ground. He basically gives very much what commonsensical or experienced perspective of the human nature. So this is what critics are criticizing the social contract of Locke. Okay, so what is the third criticism? Contradiction on the idea of individual morality, right? So as Locke has propounded the idea that the individuals are social, good, morals, and capable of ruling themselves, so the critics are there finding kind of contradiction in his idea of individual morality. So let's see what is the contradiction they are highlighting. On the one hand, it has been said that each and every individual wants maximum pleasure for the self, right? So as Locke has given the idea that there is a presence of both passion and reason in man, right? Though in the balanced manner. So when it comes to passion, man wants to maximize pleasure for the self, right? On the other hand, he ensures upon his people that they should struggle for the maximum public and general happiness, right? So on the one hand, the man wants to maximize his pleasure, but on the other hand, he is saying that man should also ensure the other people or the society should also ensure to maximize their wealth as well. Isn't this particular notion very contradictory in nature, right? When we think in today's term, it does sound a little bit more vague to us, not very clear to us, but it was very much pertinent during his time, right? Because his time was a time of what? Capitalism. People were chasing what? People were chasing wealth. There was immense competition, right? And if someone is aspiring for a particular piece of property, a particular piece of resource, he cannot ensure the welfare of the society, right? He will not talk about what the welfare of the society, because if society will also pursue the same goals or same pleasurable aim, his resource acquiring capability might get hampered, right? So this is what contradiction is. On the one hand, the man wants to maximize his pleasure, but on the other hand, as said by the Locke, that there is a sense of reason in man as well, which ensures that man also takes into consideration the self-interest of the society or general happiness of the people. So one fails to understand as to how the individual who cannot but seek his own pleasure can be required morally to wish for the general happiness. So this is not something logical, right? If I am being concerned about my own self interest, how will I advocate the idea of general happiness? How will I be able to to promote the idea of maximization of wealth of the society? This stands against the capitalist notion of even today's world, right? The people who are more capitalist in the nature, the people are more wealth seekers in nature, they basically becomes misers, they becomes very much what, selfish, right? They just ensure the accumulation of the wealth for the self. This is very less likely that they will also tend to think about the welfare of the society, right? Though in today's terms it might sound a little bit vague to us, but during that time it was very much pertinent, right? Because in today's world we have the concept like corporate social responsibility, right, where the big business houses like Tatas and Reliance and etc., with their maximization of profit, they also ensure that the people or the society grows with them, right? In today's terms it is little bit logical to us, but during their time it was not so logical, where there was a limited resource and the chasing of those resources were unlimited, right? So this is what the third contradiction was. What is the fourth contradiction? Locke probably did not realize that majority could also be tyrannical, right? Though Locke is giving the idea that people are transferring three of their rights, that is right to legislate, right to execute and right to adjudicate or judiciary, to the majority government, right? So the critics are criticizing that even the majority can turn tyrannical, right? So let's see on what grounds the critics are criticizing the Locke's idea. The right, okay, the rights in his case are transferred to the majority of the people. If rights are to be taken away from the individuals, which rights are being taken away from the individual? Right to legislate, execute and adjudicate. It does not matter whether by majority or one individual, right? Because these are some of the most important what rights, right? Because through legislation the man or the society is governed, through execution the plans are being implemented, and the judge or the judiciary or the adjudicate is the arbiter or the arbiter in case of conflict of interest, right? So how is it possible that if we ensure a majority with these three kind of very important right, what is the chances that the even majority will not turn the tyrannical, will not become tyrannical? What is the guarantee, right? What is the assurance? This is what critics are asking from the Locke, right? Therefore there is no guarantee that majority can never be tyrannous, right? Why? Because there is no guarantee, right? So this is the fourth criticism. What is the fifth and last criticism? So the fifth criticism is regarding unanimous consent of generation after generation. So we have already seen how Locke has convened a meeting, a general meeting, right, of representative from a family, right? And this particular social contract will continue generation after generation, right? So what is the guarantee that the future generation will also give their consent to the social contract which has been created by the forefathers or their previous generation, right? So to make a contract a doubtful, this becomes very doubtful for the future generation. There is no guarantee that the future generation would thoroughly follow their past generation, right? This is something very logical, something this was very much related even to the Hobbes idea, that what is the guarantee that the social contract that a particular generation is formulating, which will be followed by the future generation as well, thoroughly or strictly, right? This is very logical question. Why? Because situation, times and place does change, right? So what is the guarantee that the contract which is being formulated by the forefathers and etc. will be followed religiously by the future generation, right? So this is what the critics are criticizing Locke's social contract on, right? So this was the fifth criticism, which you can write in the answers according to the questions which has been asked, right? I have tried giving very holistic criticism which can be holistically attempted to make a answer a beautiful and complete answer. Okay, so with this we are done with Locke. So you guys can check your progress by attempting this very relevant and very very promising questions that whosoever therefore out of a state of nature unite into a community must be understood to give up all the power necessary to end for which they unite into society. So this is a statement by Locke. So the question is discussed in 200 words, 15 markers, right? You can send your answer in this particular mail handle, that is namanji910@gmail.com. I will evaluate the answer and come back with a valuable feedback. So right, so that you can enhance the quality of your answer writing. So with this, we are done with Locke, guys. We are successfully done with John Locke, and even John Locke is happy here, right, that we have understood the concept of John Locke, who is one of the most prominent political thinker, and if not completely, we have become little bit more insightful. We have become a little bit more wiser, right? Because just in few lecture series we have understood the life of Locke. We have understood the most fundamental and important concept of Locke, right? That is why Locke is, wherever he is smiling and happily cheering the UPSC Geek by NRG community that we are successfully dealt with his concept. With this, thank you so much everyone for sitting till the very end, and remember our motto statement that as you strive, so you thrive, right? And make sure to show your love as well by subscribing to the channel, that is UPSC Geek by NRG, and also ensure to join our Telegram community, which is by the Telegram handle is by the same name, that is UPSC Geek by NRG. Try searching in the Telegram, or else I will also make sure to put the link in the description so that you guys can directly join the Telegram community, where I will be sharing all the relevant materials related to PSIR optional, and also some of the most insightful UPSC analysis which I have been making since my previous attempts and years, which will for sure help you in this beautiful journey of UPSC, right? So make sure to inspire others through your sheer dedication in this beautiful new year, that is 2024. And with this, let's end today's lecture, and thank you so much.